In a compound outside Sangin, a Marine Company commander took an IED below the left knee at 0411 on a Tuesday morning. The medevac bird was 9 minutes out. She told it to leave without her. She stayed in command for 72 hours. The Corps gave her a handshake. Her Marines gave her something else. There is a question I am going to ask you tonight, and I am going to ask it twice, and I am going to answer it the second time, but not the first. The question is this: what does the United States Marine Corps owe a captain who, on the morning of the 25th of October, 2011, in a mud-walled compound on the eastern edge of the Sangin district of Helmand Province, Afghanistan, stepped on a pressure plate improvised explosive device that took her left leg below the knee, and who, having been bandaged and tourniquet and dosed with morphine by her company corpsman, refused the medical evacuation helicopter that was 9 minutes inbound for her, and instead remained in tactical command of her rifle company for the next 72 hours, on a stretcher in the corner of her company tactical operations center, with a radio handset in her right hand, which she did not at any point during those 72 hours surrender to another human being. What does the Marine Corps owe her? I am asking the question. I am not, the first time, going to answer it. Her name is Captain Rachel Elizabeth Brennan, United States Marine Corps, Military Occupational Specialty 0302, Infantry Officer. She was 28 years old on the morning I just described. She was, on that morning, the commanding officer of Kilo Company, 3rd Battalion, 8th Marines, of the 2nd Marine Division, of the 2nd Marine Expeditionary Force, headquartered at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, deployed at the time of the events I am describing to a forward operating base in the Sangin district called FOB Jackson, with elements distributed across 4 smaller patrol bases in the surrounding area, of which the compound where the IED detonated was the most easterly and the most exposed. She had been in command of Kilo Company for 14 months. She had been on her current deployment for 97 days. She had, in those 97 days, lost 3 Marines killed in action and 11 wounded, and she had written letters to all 14 families personally, in longhand. On stationery she had bought herself at the post exchange at Camp Lejeune before deployment, because she did not believe a form letter was an honest letter, and she did not believe a typed letter from a printer was a personal letter, and the writing of the letters was, by the testimony of the officers who served under her, one of the duties she discharged with the most evident care. She is, at the time of this recording, 41 years old. She lives in a row house on a brick-fronted street in the Hampton neighborhood of Baltimore, Maryland, with a small yard in the back where she grows tomatoes and a small porch in the front where she sits on summer evenings and reads. She teaches 11th grade United States history at Baltimore Polytechnic Institute, which is the public magnet school in Baltimore for students with strong aptitude in mathematics and science, and which, despite its name, also houses a robust humanities program. She has been at Poly for 9 years. She is, this year, the head of her department. Her students this year are studying, in the unit she is currently teaching, the period between the end of Reconstruction and the beginning of the First World War, with particular attention to the Spanish-American War, which she teaches in a way that I have been told by 2 former students is the unit they remember best from their entire high school careers. She wears a prosthetic leg below her left knee. She wears it under her trousers. She does not hide it. She does not display it. It is, like her car keys and her teaching credential, a thing she has and uses. Her students know she was a Marine. Her students do not know about Sangin. One of her students, in 2019, asked her, after class, whether she had lost anyone over there. She thought about it for a moment. She said, 42 came home. The number to remember is 42. Then she went back to grading papers. She is a 4th-generation officer in the United States military. Her father is Colonel Thomas Brennan, USMC retired. Her grandfather, William Brennan, was a Marine in the 1st Marine Division at the Chosin Reservoir in November and December of 1950, where he carried a Browning automatic rifle, and lost 2 toes to frostbite and never spoke about it for the remainder of his life except once, on a fishing trip with his son Thomas in 1973, when he said one paragraph about the cold and then never spoke about it again. Her great-grandfather, Patrick Brennan, was a Catholic chaplain in the United States Navy aboard the aircraft carrier USS Yorktown during the Pacific Campaign of the Second World War. He survived the war. He died in 1968 in Annapolis, Maryland, in a small house 3 blocks from the Naval Academy, of a heart attack while reading the morning paper. His granddaughter Rachel was born 15 years after his death. She has, on her bookshelf in the row house in Hampton, a copy of his Navy commission, framed in the original ink, dated the 11th of March, 1942. The paper is yellowed. The signature of the Secretary of the Navy of the United States, Frank Knox, is faded but legible. The frame is plain. The frame is on the bookshelf at eye level. I want to talk about Colonel Thomas Brennan for a minute, because Colonel Thomas Brennan is the parent in this story, and because the parent in this story is going to do something later in this video that I want you to be ready for. Colonel Thomas Brennan was born in Annapolis, Maryland, in 1953. He graduated from the United States Naval Academy in 1975. He was commissioned in the Marine Corps. He served as an infantry officer for 30 years. He commanded a rifle platoon as a lieutenant. He commanded a rifle company as a captain. He commanded an infantry battalion as a lieutenant colonel during the late 1990s and the very early 2000s. He was promoted to colonel in 2001. He served on staff at Headquarters Marine Corps and at the Joint Staff at the Pentagon. In 2003, he deployed to Afghanistan as the Chief of Staff of a Marine Task Force operating out of Kandahar. He returned in 2004. He retired the following year, at the age of 52, having completed 30 years of commissioned service, with 2 Bronze Stars and a chest of other decorations and the kind of professional reputation that would have, had he wanted it, opened the door to a comfortable consulting career in Northern Virginia. He did not want it. He went home to Annapolis. He bought a small sailboat. He sailed it on the Chesapeake. He read. He taught Sunday school at the Catholic parish his grandfather had attended. He let his daughter make her own decisions about her own military career, and he did not, by her account, push her toward the Marine Corps or away from it. And he did not, when she chose the Corps, tell her he was proud of her in those words, because he had not been raised to use those words, and he had not raised his daughter to need them. What he did, when she was commissioned in May of 2005 at the Naval Academy Chapel, was hand her her father's commissioning sword, which had been his father's commissioning sword before him, passed from William Brennan to Thomas Brennan in 1975, and now from Thomas Brennan to Rachel Brennan in 2005. He handed it to her after the ceremony, in the chapel courtyard, in front of her mother and her 2 younger sisters and her grandmother, who was at that time 89 years old and who would die 6 months later. He handed her the sword. He said, quietly, "This was your grandfather's." He said, he carried it chosen under his coat because he did not have anywhere else to put it. He said, "It has the cold in it still, if you put your hand on the blade." She did. She put her hand on the blade. She told me, in 2022, in an interview I conducted with her on her front porch in Baltimore, that she could not actually feel any cold in the blade, that the blade was room temperature, that the story her father told her was a story and not a literal claim about the metal. But she also told me that in the moment she put her hand on it, she felt cold anyway. She felt the cold of the chosen reservoir in November of 1950, even though she was standing in May sunlight in Annapolis in 2005, even though the metal was the temperature of the air around it. She felt it because her father had told her to feel it. She felt it because her grandfather, who had carried the sword and the cold both, was a man she had loved as a child, who had taught her to fish when she was 7, who had died when she was 12, who had never told her about the chosen reservoir, but who had, the entire time she had known him, smelled faintly of pipe tobacco, an aftershave, and a third smell she could not name, that she came to understand only much later, in retrospect, was the smell of a man who had, at 20 years old, walked out of a frozen mountain pass with 2 of his toes left behind in his boot and the rest of his life on the other side of that walking. She carried the sword in the procession out of the chapel. She carried it back to her parents' house. She put it on her dresser. It is now in the row house in Hampton. It is in the front closet, in a long velvet case, on the top shelf. She does not display it. She does not hide it. It is in the closet. She knows where it is. That is enough. She graduated from the Naval Academy in May of 2005 with a major in history and a class standing of 31 out of approximately 1,000 graduates. She was commissioned in the Marine Corps. She reported to the basic school at Quantico, Virginia, in the autumn of 2005 for the 6-month course that all Marine officers, regardless of eventual specialty, are required to complete. She was the honor graduate of her TBS class. She selected infantry. The selection of infantry by a female officer in 2005 was, by the policies in place at that time, not yet permissible in the standard sense. The Marine Corps Infantry Officer course, at Quantico, was at that time closed to women. The combat exclusion policy, which had been formally rescinded for many specialties by that point, still applied to ground combat arms in the Marine Corps. There was, however, a small experimental program, not publicly announced, not widely known even within the Corps, under which a small number of female officers with strong TBS performance were permitted to attend the infantry officer course on a research basis, with the understanding that their successful completion of the course would not, by itself, qualify them for assignment to an infantry billet, but would inform the Corps' ongoing internal discussions about the eventual integration of women into combat arms. She was offered a slot in this experimental program. She accepted it. She reported to IOC in April of 2006. She completed the course on the first attempt, which a meaningful percentage of male officers do not. She was, at that point, qualified by training but not by policy to serve as an infantry officer. The Corps assigned her to a logistics billet at Camp Pendleton. She served in that billet for 18 months. She did the work. She did not complain. In 2008, with the policy environment shifting and with the operational demand for officers of her quality outpacing the institutional caution about her placement, she was reassigned, on a provisional basis, to an infantry battalion at Camp Lejeune as the assistant operations officer. She served in that role through her first deployment to Afghanistan in 2009, during which she was attached to a female engagement team supporting infantry operations in southern Afghanistan, in a billet that the Corps used to thread the needle between the policy and the necessity. She came home in 2010. She was promoted to captain. The combat exclusion policy was, by that point, weeks away from the formal review that would, 2 years later, lead to its rescission. She was offered command of Kilo Company 38 on the strength of her record and on the personal recommendation of her battalion commander, who was the 3rd lieutenant colonel in 18 months, to write a fitness report on her describing her, in different language each time, as the best company-grade officer he had ever supervised. She accepted the command. She took it in August of 2010. She trained the company through the autumn and winter and spring. She deployed with the company in July of 2011. The IED took her leg in October. I want to slow down here. I want to slow down because there are some things I have to tell you about the Sangin district of Helmand Province in the autumn of 2011. And there are some things I have to tell you about what an infantry company does in a place like that. And there are some things I have to tell you about the specific compound that this story comes back to. And if I do not slow down for those things, you will hear the rest of this story without the weight it deserves. So I am going to slow down. The Sangin district is in the north of Helmand Province, in southern Afghanistan, along the Helmand River, in a long valley of irrigated farmland called the Green Zone, which is bordered on either side by desert. Sangin in 2011 was, by any measure of casualty intensity, the most violent district in the country. The British Army had held it from 2006 until the spring of 2010, taking, in those 4 years, approximately 106 killed in action, which was a figure that, when expressed as a percentage of the British forces deployed there, was higher than any equivalent figure for any British operational area since the Second World War. In April of 2010, the United States Marine Corps assumed responsibility for the district. The 1st Marine Unit in was 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines, which took 25 killed in 7 months. They were relieved by 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, in October of 2010. 3-5 took 25 killed and 184 wounded in their 7-month tour, which is, expressed as a casualty rate, the highest of any Marine battalion in either of the 2 American wars in the post-September 11th period. They were relieved by 1st Battalion, 5th Marines. 1-5 was relieved by 3-8 in July of 2011. 3-8, by the time Captain Brennan's company arrived, was inheriting a battle space that had been bled into by every American infantry battalion that had walked through it for 18 months. The geography of the work was the same in every rotation. The infantry companies operated out of the Central Forward Operating Base, FOB Jackson, which was inside Sangin town. The companies maintained outposts, called patrol bases, distributed through the surrounding agricultural area, small mud-walled compounds, typically housing 1 or 2 platoons, accessible from FOB Jackson only by foot patrol or by helicopter. The patrol bases existed to project presence into the surrounding countryside, to disrupt the Taliban's ability to emplace IDs along the canal paths and the field boundaries, and to provide a forward staging point for the company's operations. The patrol bases were, by their nature, isolated. They were resupplied irregularly. They were under regular small arms harassment. The ground around them was, in many places, so thoroughly emplaced with IEDs by the Taliban that the act of walking from one patrol base to another, a distance of perhaps 2 kilometers, could take a foot patrol 4 hours, because the patrol had to stop and clear the ground in front of it, meter by meter, with handheld metal detectors as it moved. Kilo Company, when Captain Brennan inherited it, operated out of FOB Jackson with platoons distributed across 3 patrol bases. The most easterly of these patrol bases, the one I am going to come back to, was a compound the company called PB Talon. PB Talon was a former Afghan farmstead. Approximately 50 meters by 60 meters, surrounded by a mud wall approximately 3 meters tall, with a single gated entrance on the north side, with a date palm in the southwest corner of the courtyard, with a series of small one-story buildings along the inner walls that the company had reinforced with sandbags and HESCO barriers, and that the company used as the platoon command post, the squad living quarters, the medical area, and the ammunition storage. The company commander did not normally live at PB Talon. The company commander lived at FOB Jackson. The company commander visited PB Talon by foot patrol or by mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicle when the road was open, approximately once every 10 days, to confer with the platoon commander, to walk the perimeter, to talk to the Marines, and to make whatever decisions about the patrol base's operations needed to be made on the ground. On the morning of the 25th of October, 2011, Captain Brennan was at PB Talon. She had arrived the previous afternoon by foot patrol from PB Charlie, which was the middle patrol base. She had spent the night at Talon. She had eaten dinner with the platoon, 2nd Platoon, Kilo Company, under the command of 1st Lieutenant Marcus Halstead, 25 years old, of Cincinnati, Ohio. She had slept in a small room in the corner of the platoon command post, on a cot, for approximately 5 hours. She had been awakened at 0330 by her gunnery sergeant, Master Sergeant Cole Verrick, then 38 years old, of Detroit, Michigan, the company gunny, who had accompanied her to Talon, to discuss with her the patrol schedule for the morning. She had drunk a cup of instant coffee. She had put her boots on. She had put her plate carrier on. She had checked her rifle. She had walked out into the courtyard with Vurik at approximately 04:05 to begin a walk of the perimeter before the morning patrol departed. The courtyard was lit, partially, by a single fluorescent light mounted on the wall of the platoon command post. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten, but the courtyard itself was still dark. The ground was packed earth with a series of stone pavers laid in a rough path from the command post door to the gated entrance. Vurik was walking on her right. They were talking about the morning patrol. She stepped on the third paver from the command post door with her left foot. The pressure plate was buried 2 inches below the paver. The paver was not a paver in the original sense. It was a flat stone the Taliban had emplaced several nights earlier, while the patrol base was occupied by an Afghan local who had been paid or coerced into walking up to the gate at 3 in the morning with the stone under his coat and the device in a satchel, and into the courtyard while the sentry on the wall was looking the wrong way for 40 seconds. The local had laid the stone. He had laid the device beneath it. He had walked back out. The sentry had not seen him. The sentry never knew he had not seen him. The device sat there for an estimated 4 to 7 days. The device was a pressure plate connected to a yellow plastic palm oil jug filled with approximately 5 kilograms of homemade explosive, ammonium nitrate, and aluminum powder, with a small amount of fragmentation in the form of nails and washers, buried 6 inches deep, with a battery pack and the pressure plate above it. It was a known design. It was the design that had been used to take, by my best estimate, more than half of the limbs lost by American Marines in Sangin in the previous 18 months. It was unsophisticated. It was effective. It functioned exactly as designed when she stepped on it. The blast lifted her off the ground. It separated her left leg below the knee. The leg traveled approximately 6 meters and came to rest near the base of the date palm. The blast threw her body to her right, into Vurik, who was knocked down but not wounded, the geometry of the blast cone having been entirely contained on her side of him. She landed on her back, on the packed earth, approximately 3 meters from where she had been standing. She was conscious. She was, by Vurik's later account to me, conscious throughout. She did not scream. She made, Vurik said, a single sound that was not a scream. It was a sound he could not describe except by saying it was the sound of a person who has just been informed of something she had already half suspected. She made the sound. Then she said, clearly, to Vurik, who was already moving toward her with the tourniquet from his individual first aid kit in his hand, my left leg. He said, I see it. He said, I'm putting it on. He had the tourniquet on her thigh, 3 inches above where the leg ended, in 14 seconds. He cinched it. He locked it. The bleeding from the femoral artery, which had been catastrophic, slowed, and then largely stopped. He shouted for the platoon corpsman. The corpsman was hospital man 2nd Class Miguel Peretta, 23 years old, of San Antonio, Texas. Peretta was at her side within 30 seconds of the blast. Peretta did the second tourniquet. Peretta started the 4. Peretta gave her the morphine. Peretta did the things he had been trained to do, in the order he had been trained to do them, with hands that, by his own account to me much later, were shaking the entire time, and that did not, despite shaking, miss a single step. The platoon command post was 120 feet away. Lieutenant Halstead was out of the door of the command post and at her side within 90 seconds of the blast. The radio call to FOB Jackson, requesting medical evacuation, went out at 0413, 2 minutes after the blast. The request was acknowledged. The medical evacuation flight, which was a UH-60 Black Hawk operated by an Army medevac detachment based at Camp Bastion, was airborne within 4 minutes of the request. The estimated time of arrival to PB Talone was 9 minutes. The flight crew began transmitting standard medevac coordination information to the patrol base, requesting an updated patient assessment, requesting confirmation of the landing zone, requesting that the patient be prepared for litter loading. Vurik, who had taken the radio handset from the platoon's radio operator and who was managing the inbound coordination, looked down at his captain on the ground, with the tourniquet on her thigh, with the 4 in her arm, with the morphine starting to take, with her face pale and her eyes open and her jaw set. And he said to her, "Ma'am, the bird's 9 out. We're going to get you on it. We're going to get you home." She looked at him. She said, "Negative, top." He said, "Ma'am." She said, "Negative. Find me a stretcher I can run a radio from. I'm not getting on that bird." He said, "Ma'am, you've lost your leg." She said, "I know what I've lost. I'm not getting on the bird. Get the XO on the radio. Tell him I'm staying in command. Tell him to come up to Talon by the next available movement and shadow me until I'm satisfied he can take it. Until then, I'm in command. Find me a stretcher." Vurick told me when I sat down with him in the kitchen of the group home in Ypsilanti, Michigan, where he now works with adolescent boys who have been removed from their families for reasons the state of Michigan documents, and that he, Vurick, declines to discuss with me out of respect for the boys. Vurick told me, in that kitchen, with a cup of coffee in front of him and the sound of one of the boys taking a shower somewhere in the back of the house, that the moment his captain told him to find her a stretcher she could run a radio from was the moment he understood, for the first time in 19 years of service in the United States Marine Corps, what the word command actually meant. He said, "I had heard the word my whole career." He said, "I had used it." He said, "I had been commanded, and I had given commands to junior Marines, and I had thought I knew what the word was." He said, "I did not know what the word was until that morning." He said, "She was on her back, on the dirt, with her legs 6 meters away from her under a date palm, with a tourniquet on what was left of her thigh, with morphine in her arm, with her company 140 Marines spread over 3 patrol bases and a forward operating base, with a medevac bird 9 minutes out, with every legal and medical and institutional reason to get on that bird, and she said no." He said, "She did not say it because she was confused." He said, "She did not say it because the morphine had not hit." He said, "She said it because she had done the math, in the seconds between the blast and my tourniquet, about what would happen to her company if she handed it off in the middle of a contact cycle to an executive officer who had not been forward in 11 days. And she had decided that the math did not work, and she was going to stay in command until the math worked." He said, "That is what command is." He said, "I did not know that until she showed me." He said, "I am 49 years old. I served 19 years in the United States Marine Corps. I retired as a master gunnery sergeant. I have been to Iraq 3 times and to Afghanistan twice. I have been commanded by some good officers and some bad officers, and a lot of officers who were neither. I have been commanded, in my whole career, by exactly one officer who knew what the word meant. She is teaching high school in Baltimore. I am going to drive down there in 2 weeks for her annual gathering. I will do this every October until one of us is dead. That is what I owe her. There is no version of my life in which I do not owe her this." End of statement. I am going to leave Vurick's statement where it is. I am not going to comment on it. I am going to move forward, because the next 72 hours are the spine of this story, and you need to understand them before I can tell you the rest. The medevac helicopter arrived at PB Talon at 0422, 11 minutes after the radio call, 2 minutes behind the original estimate due to a routing change to avoid a known small arms threat zone. The helicopter landed in the small dirt, clearing 30 meters outside the north gate of the patrol base. The flight medic ran in. The flight medic was a sergeant in the United States Army, attached to the medevac detachment, whose name I have not been authorized to use. He arrived in the courtyard. He saw the captain on the ground. He saw Pareto working on her. He knelt down. He began the standard exchange of patient information with Pareto. He prepared to load her onto the litter. He looked up at her face. He said, "Ma'am, we're loading you now." She said to him, in a voice that the flight medic later described in his after-action statement as quiet but completely unmistakable, "Sergeant, I am declining the evacuation. Take any other casualty you have on board. Take Paretta's recommendations on stabilization supplies you can leave with us. Lift off and report to your command that the patient refused transport." The flight medic stared at her. The flight medic looked at Paretta. Paretta shook his head. Once, in a way that Paretta told me later was not an endorsement of her decision, but an acknowledgement that the decision had been made and that the flight medic was not going to change it. The flight medic, whose training and whose chain of command and whose every professional instinct were screaming at him to load this woman on his aircraft and lift her out of this courtyard within the next 90 seconds, did the thing that I want you to consider for a moment, because it is the thing that nobody ever credits him for and that I think deserves to be credited. He listened to her. He took her at her word. He treated her, in that moment, as the commanding officer of a Marine rifle company in contact, who was making a tactical decision within her authority, and not as a critically wounded patient whose decision could be overridden by his clinical judgment. He nodded. He said, "Yes, ma'am." He said, "I am leaving you the following supplies." He listed them. He left them. He stood up. He stepped back. He spoke into his shoulder mic to his pilot. He walked out of the courtyard. The helicopter lifted off at 0431, 20 minutes after the blast, with no patient on board. The flight medic, in his statement, wrote one additional line at the bottom, in his own hand, beneath his signature. The line read, "She knew what she was doing." The line is in the medevac detachment's records. I have seen it. It is the only handwritten line in a document that is otherwise entirely typed. The helicopter departed. The sun came up. The captain was, by 0500, on a folding canvas litter that Vurick and Paretta and two of the platoon's lance corporals had carried into the inner room of the platoon command post, which was the room the platoon used as its tactical operations center. The room was approximately 12 feet by 15 feet. It contained a folding table with a map under a sheet of acetate, two folding chairs, a generator-powered radio rack with 3 radios on 3 different nets, a coffee maker, and now a casualty on a litter against the eastern wall. The litter was angled so that she could see the map and the radio rack from where she lay. Paretta set up in 4-stand next to the litter. Paretta hung the morphine drip. Paretta calculated the dosage to keep her in front of the pain without putting her under, and Paretta recalculated the dosage every 2 hours for the next 72 hours, on a paper chart he taped to the wall above the litter, in handwriting that became, over the course of the 3 days, progressively less legible as Paretta himself became progressively less slept. Paretta did not leave her side, except to eat and to use the latrine, for the entire 72 hours. Paretta is now an emergency room physician at a hospital in Houston, Texas. He completed medical school on the GI Bill after he separated from the Navy in 2015. He told me, in 2022, that the 72 hours he spent monitoring Captain Brennan in the TOC at PB Toulon were, and remain, the most consequential clinical hours of his career, and that he learned in those hours, from her, things about the management of a patient who is also commanding an organization that he uses, in modified form. Every shift he works in the emergency department at Memorial Hermann. He said, "She taught me that a patient is a person, and a person is a set of obligations to other people, and the management of a wound is the management of those obligations as much as it is the management of the wound itself." He said, "I was 23. I did not have the language for what she was teaching me. I have the language now. I owe the language to her." She called the executive officer on the radio at 0515. The executive officer was First Lieutenant David Whitlock, 26 years old, of Phoenix, Arizona, who was at FOB Jackson, who had been awakened by the radio operator at the FOB at 0415 with the news of his commanding officer's wound, who had been, by his own account to me later, packing his gear to come forward and assume command of the company under the assumption that Captain Brennan was at that moment on a helicopter to Camp Bastion. Whitlock answered the radio. Captain Brennan said to him, in a voice that Whitlock would later describe as completely level, "Whitlock, this is Brennan. Confirm receipt. Whitlock said, "Ma'am, copy." "Ma'am, are you?" She cut him off. She said, "I am still in command. I am at Talon. I am stable. I am running the company from here for the duration of the contact cycle until I am satisfied with the conditions for handoff. You will move to Talon on the next available patrol or movement, and you will shadow me. You will not assume command without my explicit handoff. Confirm receipt." Whitlock paused. Whitlock confirmed receipt. Whitlock then asked her, off the formal radio protocol, in a voice that he later told me he was not entirely in control of, whether she was, in his words, in her right mind. She told him, "Whitlock, that is a fair question, and I am going to answer it once. I am on a morphine drip calibrated by Peretta to keep me lucid. I have been awake for 2 hours. I have lost my left leg below the knee. My company is in contact cycle in a battle space that has lost an officer every 6 weeks for the last 18 months, and a handoff to an officer who has not been forward in 11 days, in the next 9 minutes, is a handoff that I am not willing to authorize. When I am satisfied that you can take it, I will hand it off. Until then, I am in command. If you want to challenge that, you will need to call battalion. Battalion will need to call regiment. Regiment will need to authorize a relief for cause. By the time that paperwork moves, this contact cycle will be over and I will have handed it off anyway. Save us both the trouble. Confirm receipt." Whitlock confirmed receipt. Whitlock signed off the net. Whitlock, in his statement to me 10 years later, said, "I have thought about that radio call every week of my life since." He said, "I was, at that moment, an officer who had been told by his commanding officer, who was lying on a litter with her leg blown off, that she was going to keep doing her job, and that I was going to come help her do it, and that the institution was not going to be permitted to interfere." He said, "She was right. The relief paperwork would have taken 72 hours. The contact cycle was 72 hours. She was right about everything." The contact cycle she was referring to was a known pattern in Sangin. The Taliban, in that district, in that period, would emplace IEDs and execute a small ambush, and then, 3 to 7 days later, when the affected American unit was assessed to be in a recovery posture, would execute a follow-on engagement against a different platoon or patrol base in the company area, in an attempt to exploit the perceived disorganization of a unit that had taken a casualty. The contact cycle from the IED that took Captain Brennan's leg was assessed by the company intelligence cell within 4 hours of the blast to have a high probability of producing a follow-on engagement against either PB Charlie or PB Bravo within 72 hours. Captain Brennan was, by 0800 on the morning of the blast, reviewing the intelligence assessment from her litter with the chart on the table tilted so she could see it, with the radio handset in her right hand. She made 3 decisions in the first 2 hours after reviewing the assessment. She redirected one squad from PB Bravo to reinforce PB Charlie, on the basis that Charlie was more exposed. She authorized a change to the patrol schedule that doubled the frequency of mounted patrols on the road between Bravo and Jackson, on the basis that the road was the most likely route the Taliban would use to move fighters into position. She requested, through her battalion operations officer, a 4-hour reassignment of an Army Shadow unmanned aerial vehicle from a neighboring battalion's area to provide overhead surveillance of the Charlie sector for the period when she assessed a contact most likely. The first 2 decisions were within her authority. The third decision required battalion approval. Battalion approved it within 40 minutes. The Shadow was overhead by 1400. The overhead imagery, when it arrived, identified 2 groups of military-aged males with what appeared to be weapons, moving in a pattern consistent with a planned engagement, in a compound approximately 800 meters from PB Charlie. The imagery was forwarded to the company. Captain Brennan, from her litter, authorized the engagement. The engagement was conducted by a section of Marine attack helicopters operating in support at 14:53 on the afternoon of the 25th of October, 2011. The 2 groups were eliminated. The follow-on attack on PB Charlie did not occur. Charlie reported quiet through the night. The second engagement of the contact cycle came the next day, the 26th of October, at 0642, when a Marine foot patrol from PB Bravo, moving along a canal path approximately 1 kilometer south of the patrol base, encountered a complex ambush, small arms fire from 2 positions, supported by a recoilless rifle, with a secondary IED aim placed on the most likely casualty extraction route. The patrol took 2 wounded in the initial volley. The patrol leader, a staff sergeant named Hector Ramirez of El Paso, Texas, called in the contact. The call came into the company TOC at PB Talon, where Captain Brennan was, by then, on her second day on the litter, with Peretta having recalibrated the morphine drip down by approximately 15% to sharpen her cognition for the day's expected contacts. Captain Brennan took the call. She received the report. She authorized Ramirez to break contact via an alternate route she identified on the map by reference to a small bridge 200 meters north of his position. She vectored a quick reaction force from FOB Jackson by mounted vehicle to a link-up point. She requested and received air support in the form of 2 Marine F-18s that had been on station for a different mission and were diverted to her contact. She managed the casualty evacuation of Ramirez's 2 wounded directly by radio with the medevac detachment that was, by some institutional irony I will not comment on, the same detachment whose flight medic had walked out of her courtyard the previous morning. Both wounded Marines were evacuated within 23 minutes of the initial contact. Both survived. The ambush was broken. Ramirez's patrol returned to PB Bravo with no further casualties. The recoilless rifle position was later struck by air. 2 enemy combatants were confirmed killed. The contact ended at 0815. The total elapsed time from the initial contact to the all-clear was 1 hour and 33 minutes. Captain Brennan was on the radio for the entire hour and 33 minutes. Peretta, who was watching her vital signs on a portable monitor he had cabled into her force setup, told me later that her heart rate during the contact never exceeded 98 beats per minute, which was, in his clinical assessment, a heart rate that would have been low for an uninjured officer running a contact of that intensity, and which was, for an officer on her second day post-amputation on a morphine drip, a heart rate he could not, 10 years later, fully explain. He said, "I have thought about it." He said, "I think she had decided, before the contact began, that she was going to be calm, and so she was calm." He said, "I do not know how a person does that. I have never seen another person do it. I have seen a lot of people in a lot of conditions, in the Navy and in the emergency room. I have not seen another person do that." The third engagement came on the morning of the 27th, less than 24 hours later. It was a probing attack on PB Charlie, executed by a small fighting element estimated at 6 to 9 combatants, under cover of pre-dawn darkness. The probe was detected by a Marine on the wall who had night vision goggles and who saw the movement and called it in before the combatants reached effective small arms range. The probe was repulsed by direct fire from the patrol base's defensive positions. No Marines were wounded. 2 combatants were killed. The remaining combatants withdrew. The contact lasted 19 minutes. Captain Brennan, on her litter at PB Talon, monitored the contact, authorized the use of an indirect fire mission from the company's mortar section to suppress the withdrawing combatants, and confirmed the all-clear at 0541. The contact cycle, by the company's intelligence assessment, was over. The pattern was complete. The follow-on phase had been resolved. There would not be another engagement in this cycle. She lay on the litter for another 20 hours. She handed off command to First Lieutenant Whitlock at 0812 on the morning of the 28th of October, 2011, 72 hours and 1 minute after the IED detonated. The handoff was conducted in the TOC at PB Talon, with Whitlock present, with Vurick present, with Peretta present, with the platoon commander Halstead present, with the company first sergeant present, and with the radio operator present. The handoff consisted of approximately 11 minutes of verbal briefing, current locations and statuses of all company elements, current intelligence assessments, current logistics posture, current personnel status, including the names of the wounded and the status of their evacuations and follow-on care, current relationships with the local Afghan population, including the names of the elders she had been engaging and the topics still open with each of them, followed by a single sentence. She said, looking at Whitlock from the litter, "Whitlock, you have the company." He said, "Ma'am, I have the company." She closed her eyes. She said to Peretta, "Doc, I'm done. Get me on the next bird." Peretta called the medevac request in at 0814. The bird was overhead at 0826. She was loaded onto the litter and carried out of the TOC, through the courtyard, past the date palm, past the place where her leg had been, through the north gate, to the helicopter. The Marines of 2nd Platoon, Kilo Company, 3-8, lined the route from the TOC to the gate, in two informal ranks, 23 of them, in their utilities and their plate carriers, with their rifles slung. They did not call attention. They did not present arms. She was a captain, not a flag, and the protocols of presentation did not require it. They stood. They watched her go past. She was, at this point, conscious but not speaking. She looked at each of them as she passed. She was carried through the gate. She was loaded into the helicopter. The helicopter lifted off at 0831. She was at Camp Bastion within 22 minutes. She was in surgery within 40. She was on a C-17 to Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany within 18 hours. She was at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland, within 5 days. She would remain at Walter Reed as an inpatient and then as an outpatient receiving rehabilitation for the next 5 months. I want to talk about Walter Reed now, because Walter Reed is where the second part of this story happens, and the second part of this story is, in some ways, the part that requires the more careful telling. Walter Reed in late 2011 and early 2012 was a hospital under quiet institutional pressure. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were both ongoing. Although Iraq was in the final stages of the American withdrawal, the casualty stream from Afghanistan was steady. The amputee population at Walter Reed was, at the time Captain Brennan arrived, the largest concentration of major limb amputees the United States military medical system had hosted since the end of the Vietnam War, and possibly, depending on how one counted, since the end of the Second World War. The hospital had, in response to this population, developed a sophisticated rehabilitation infrastructure. The Military Advanced Training Center, which housed advanced prosthetic fitting and gait training equipment, the integration of psychological support services into the rehabilitation pipeline, and a culture among the staff and among the patients that was, by every account I have heard, including hers, extraordinary. The rehabilitation environment was, in her words, the most professionally functional environment she had encountered in 7 years of service. She told me, "The doctors were the best doctors I have ever met. The physical therapists were the best physical therapists. The prosthetists were the best prosthetists. The other patients were the best people I have ever lived among." She said, "If I had to lose a leg, and apparently I did, Walter Reed in 2011 was the place to lose it." I have nothing bad to say about Walter Reed. The Walter Reed part of the story is not where the wound is. The wound, the second wound, was administrative. She arrived at Walter Reed on the 2nd of November, 2011. She was assigned to the inpatient amputee ward. She underwent a series of revision surgeries on her left leg over the next 3 weeks to refine the residual limb for prosthetic fitting. She was discharged from inpatient care on the 29th of November and transitioned to outpatient status, living in the Fisher House facility on the Walter Reed campus, attending physical therapy and prosthetic training 6 days a week. By mid-December, she had been fitted with her first temporary prosthetic. By mid-January, she was walking, with assistance, on the prosthetic. By the end of February, she was walking without assistance, with a noticeable but controlled gait, on a definitive transtibial prosthesis with a microprocessor-controlled foot. She was, by the standards of the rehabilitation team, an exceptional case, a patient whose physical recovery was in the top decile of the population they treated, and whose psychological adjustment was, in the words of one of her physicians whom I interviewed in 2023, the most stable adjustment he had observed in a major limb amputee in his career. In the middle of December, while she was still in the early stages of her outpatient rehabilitation, she received a visit at Walter Reed from her battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hayes. Hayes had flown up from Camp Lejeune for the visit. He spent the better part of a day with her. He brought her a card signed by the battalion staff. He brought her a small framed photograph of Kilo Company that the company first sergeant had assembled for her. He sat with her in the day room of the Fisher House for approximately 3 hours. They talked. He asked her, near the end of the conversation, what she wanted to do. She said, "I want to stay in." She said, "I cannot go back to an infantry billet. I know that. I have lost the leg. The leg makes infantry impossible. But I can teach. I can serve on staff. I can do the work that does not require the leg. I want to stay in the Corps." He nodded. He said, "I think the right place for you is the Wounded Warrior Regiment." He said, "There is a billet at Quantico that I think you would be ideal for." He said, "It is an officer billet, supervising the transition support program for wounded officers and senior enlisted." He said, "I am going to make that happen." He said, "I am going to talk to the right people at Headquarters Marine Corps. I am going to talk to the regimental commander at the Wounded Warrior Regiment. I am going to put it in writing. I am going to get this done before I rotate out of command in March." She thanked him. She believed him. He had been, throughout her time as his company commander, an officer she had respected. He had been steady. He had been competent. He had been, by her assessment, exactly the kind of battalion commander a junior officer hopes to serve under. She had no reason, on that afternoon in the Fisher House day room in December of 2011, to disbelieve a single word he had said to her. She did not disbelieve him. She thanked him. He left. He flew back to Camp Lejeune. He did, on his return, send an email to the G1 section at Headquarters Marine Corps on the 14th of February, 2012, regarding the case of Captain Rachel E. Brennan, USMC, MOS 0302, currently undergoing rehabilitation at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, requesting consideration for assignment to the Wounded Warrior Regiment in a supervisory capacity. The email is one paragraph long. It identifies her by name, rank, and service number. It outlines her record. It states his recommendation. It closes with the sentence, "Working on it. Will follow up Q2." The email was sent at 15:11 on the 14th of February. It was acknowledged by a major in the G1 section at 0847 on the 15th of February with a single line, "Copy. Will track." The email was filed. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hayes retired from the United States Marine Corps on the 30th of March, 2012, 6 weeks after sending the email and 45 days before the second quarter of the fiscal year began. He retired at his 30-year point. He had served honorably. He was entitled to retire. He retired. On the 2nd of April, 2012, 3 days after his retirement, he reported for his first day of work at the Northrop Grumman Corporation in Falls Church, Virginia, as a vice president for strategic programs in the company's land systems division. His starting compensation was, by the proxy statement his hiring caused his new employer to file with the Securities and Exchange Commission, $290,000 a year in base salary, plus a target bonus of 40%, plus an initial equity grant valued at the time of grant at approximately $110,000, plus benefits. The total first-year compensation was in excess of $450,000. This is a matter of public record. The proxy statement is filed. I have read it. I am not making any of this up. His successor as the commanding officer of 3rd Battalion, 8th Marines was Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Pellegrini, who assumed command on the 31st of March, 2012. Pellegrini inherited, as all incoming battalion commanders inherit, a pile of administrative business from his predecessor. Among the items in the pile was the file on Captain Rachel E. Brennan, currently in rehabilitation at Walter Reed, regarding whom no follow-up action was tasked, no project was open, no flag was set, and no note was attached except the original email of the 14th of February, which was sitting in the file. Pellegrini, by his own account to me, which I obtained in writing in 2023 through a process I am not going to describe, but which involved no hostility on his part. Pellegrini, by his own account, did not at any point read the email. He had no reason to read the email. The email was not flagged for action. It was not on the running list of outstanding personnel matters that Hayes had walked him through during the change of command. It was, in the volume of paper that an outgoing battalion commander hands to an incoming battalion commander, one paragraph in one document, in one folder in one file cabinet. And Pellegrini did not read every paragraph in every document, in every folder, in every file cabinet. Because Pellegrini was a competent officer running a battalion of 900 Marines, and he made the same triage decisions every battalion commander makes. The email was not in his triage. The email sat in the file. The second quarter of fiscal year 2012 came and went. No follow-up was sent. No call was made. The Wounded Warrior Regiment billet at Quantico was, in due course, filled by another officer through normal channels. The transaction was complete. Captain Brennan, in Bethesda, Maryland, continued her rehabilitation, waiting to hear from a lieutenant colonel who was, by then, sitting in an office in Falls Church earning $450,000 a year, and who was not, at any point in the spring of 2012, thinking about her. She did not hear. She finished her rehabilitation. She was issued her definitive prosthesis. She passed her medical fitness for duty evaluation in March of 2012 at the limits of what the regulations permitted for a transtibial amputee. She returned, briefly, to Camp Lejeune in April. She reported to Pellegrini's office. She introduced herself. Pellegrini was professional. Pellegrini was kind. Pellegrini did not know about the Quantico billet. He did not know there had been a conversation in a Fisher House day room in December. He did not know there was an email in a file. He told her, in good faith, that he would work with her to identify an appropriate continuing assignment. He said he would put her in for staff billets. He said the Corps had a use for an officer of her experience and her record. He believed what he was saying. She believed him too. She had no reason not to. She returned to her quarters. She waited. She waited through April. She waited through May. The staff billets that Pellegrini was working did not materialize. The Marine Corps personnel system, which is a system of finite slots filled on a rotating basis through a process that runs on its own clock, did not have a slot for her in the cycle that was running. She was, by July of 2012, on a kind of administrative drift. She had a desk at Camp Lejeune. She had no specific job. She was being paid. She was, by every external indicator, on active duty in good standing. She was, by her own internal assessment, watching her career in one quiet day at a time. In August of 2012, 10 months after the IED, she submitted her request for medical retirement. The request was processed. The retirement was approved. She was retired from the United States Marine Corps with a 100% service-connected disability rating from the Department of Veterans Affairs, with full retirement benefits, with the rank of captain, on the 15th of November, 2012. She was 29 years old. She had served 7 years and 6 months on active commission duty. She had commanded a rifle company in combat. She had lost a leg. She had run a contact cycle from a litter. She had survived. She had been told, in good faith by an officer she trusted, that there was a continuing place for her in the Corps, and that place had failed to materialize through a sequence of events that involved no malice and no enemy action and no act of God. Only the ordinary friction of an institution losing track of one paragraph in one document, in one folder, in one file cabinet during the routine churn of a change of command. The Corps did not, by this account, do anything wrong. The Corps did not commit an injustice. The Corps did the things institutions do. The Corps moved on. She moved out. In 2019, 7 years after her retirement, for reasons she has explained to me, but which I am not going to relay here in detail, because they are reasons that belong to her, Captain Brennan submitted a Freedom of Information Act request to Headquarters Marine Corps for the personnel file maintained on her by the Manpower and Reserve Affairs section, including all correspondence concerning her assignment after the period of her medical rehabilitation. The request was processed. The file was provided. She received it on a Tuesday morning in the foyer reading room at the Federal Building in Baltimore, Maryland, in February of 2019. She spent 4 hours in the reading room. She read every page in the file. The Hayes email was on page 163. It was the only document in the file concerning the Wounded Warrior Regiment assignment. It was a single paragraph. It had not been followed up on. There was no note attached to it. There was no record of any action taken between the 15th of February, 2012, when the G1 Major acknowledged it, and the date her file was closed when she retired in November of that year. She read the email. She read it twice. She made a photocopy of the page on the reading room copier. She paid for the copy at the desk. She put it in her bag. She drove home. She did not, by her own account to me, cry. She did not, by her own account to me, feel surprised. She told me, when I asked her about the moment in 2022 on her front porch in Baltimore, I had known for years what had happened. I had known from the moment Pellegrini told me he would work my staff billets, and the staff billets did not come. I had known what the architecture of it was. The FOIA only confirmed the architecture. The thing the FOIA gave me was the name of the person and the date of the email and the sentence at the bottom. The thing the FOIA gave me was a paragraph. The paragraph did not change my life. My life was already what it was. The paragraph only made the architecture explicit. She paused. She looked out at the brick street in Hampton. She said, "I will tell you what I felt. I felt the way you feel when a person you respected dies, and you are at the funeral, and you understand, at the funeral, that you had been carrying a small private hope that they would do something at the end of their life that would resolve a thing between you, and they did not, and now they cannot, because they are dead. That is what I felt. I felt the small private hope go away. I felt the architecture become permanent. And then I went home and I taught my 5th period history class on Wednesday afternoon because I had a class to teach, and the class did not care about the architecture. She did not, when I asked, tell me whether she had attempted to contact Hayes after reading the email. She said only, that conversation, if I had it, would be a private conversation. I am not going to discuss it with you. I am not going to discuss whether it happened. I have my own way of carrying this. That way involves not putting Marcus Hayes in the public record any more than the public record has already put him. He is in the public record. The Northrop Grumman proxy is in the public record. The fact that he sent the email and did not follow up on it is, now that you have asked, in the public record. That is enough public record. I am not going to add to it. I changed the subject. I want to tell you about her father now. I told you, much earlier, that the parent in this story would do something I wanted you to be ready for. I am going to tell you now what he did. Colonel Thomas Brennan, USMC retired, age 58 at the time, learned of his daughter's wound by telephone at his home in Annapolis, Maryland, at 0712 Eastern Standard Time on the morning of the 25th of October, 2011. The call was placed by the Marine Corps Casualty Assistance Officer assigned to his daughter's case, an officer who was performing the standard institutional function of notifying the family of a wounded service member. The officer informed Colonel Brennan of the wound, the location, the nature of the injury, the current condition of his daughter, and the projected medical evacuation timeline. The officer informed Colonel Brennan that his daughter was, at that moment, alive and stable. The officer asked Colonel Brennan if he had any questions. Colonel Brennan asked one question. He asked, "Is she still in command?" The officer paused. The officer said, "Colonel, I do not have that information." Colonel Brennan said, "Please find out." The officer said he would. The officer called back at 0841. The officer said, "Colonel, she is still in command. She refused the medevac. She is on a stretcher in her tactical operations center running her company by radio. The bird left without her." Colonel Brennan said, "Thank you." He hung up the phone. He sat at his kitchen table, in his bathrobe, with a cup of coffee in front of him that had gone cold, for approximately 90 seconds. His wife, Sarah Brennan, was standing in the doorway of the kitchen. She had heard the call. She was waiting. He looked up at her. He said, in a voice that she would later describe to her daughter as the voice she had not heard from him in 35 years of marriage, "Sarah, our daughter is alive, and she has lost her leg, and she is still in command." Sarah Brennan crossed the kitchen. She put her hands on her husband's shoulders. He put his hand on her hand. They stayed that way for several minutes. Then he got up. He shaved. He dressed. He drove to the parish church 3 blocks from the house. He went into the empty church. He sat in the pew his grandfather had sat in. He prayed for 1 hour. He drove home. He packed a bag. He and Sarah drove to Bethesda. They were in the visitors' lounge at Walter Reed when their daughter arrived from Germany 5 days later. They did not leave Bethesda for 3 weeks. They stayed at the Fisher house. They were in the room when she woke up from the second of her revision surgeries. They were in the room when she walked, for the first time, on the temporary prosthetic in the 3rd week of December. He did not, in any of the conversations they had during those months, tell her he was proud of her. He had not been raised to use those words. He had not raised her to need them. What he did, in late January of 2012, when she was beginning to walk on her own, was take her, on a Sunday afternoon, to a small restaurant outside the gates of the Walter Reed campus for lunch. She was in a wheelchair for the trip because the prosthetic at that point was usable but tired her over distance. He pushed the chair. They sat at a small table. They ordered. He waited until the food had come and the waitress had left. Then he said, quietly, "Rachel." He said, "I want to tell you something." He said, "Your grandfather, at Chosen, walked out of that mountain pass with 2 of his toes left behind in his boot, and he never, in the 23 years that he was your grandfather, told me about it." He said, "I knew about the toes because my mother told me. I knew about the cold because my mother told me. I knew nothing else." He said, "I have spent my whole life wondering what he carried that he did not say." He said, "I am going to ask you something I have never asked another human being, and I want you to know before I ask it that you are entirely free to tell me no, and that if you tell me no, I will not ask again. And our relationship will be the same as it has been, and you will owe me nothing for asking." She said, "Ask." He said, "Tell me what happened in the courtyard." She looked at him for a long time. She told me, in 2022, that she does not remember whether she said anything for the first 30 seconds. She remembers only that she looked at her father, who was 60 years old at that point, who had served 30 years in the Marine Corps, who had commanded an infantry battalion, who had been to Afghanistan in 2003, who had watched his father carry the cold of Chosen for 2 decades without speaking of it, who was sitting across from her in a small restaurant in Bethesda, Maryland, asking his daughter for the thing his father had not given him. She told him. She told him everything I have told you about the courtyard, and the paver, and Vurick, and Peretta, and the helicopter, and the 72 hours, and Whitlock, and the contact cycle, and the date palm, and the procession out of the gate. She told him for 1 hour and 20 minutes. He did not interrupt her. He did not take notes. He did not, at any point in the telling, look away. When she was finished, he sat for a long moment. He said, "Rachel." He said, "Thank you." He said, "I am not going to ask you about it again. I am not going to repeat it to anyone. It is not my story. You have given me enough. He said, Abun tirator no lu tiembla la mano. And then he stopped, and he laughed, a small dry laugh. And he said, That was your great-grandfather's saying, and I do not even know why I said it just now in Spanish, because my Spanish is bad, and your great-grandfather's Spanish was bad too. And we both got the saying from a mess sergeant from Texas who served with him on the Yorktown and who used to say it when he was teaching the chaplain to play poker. He said, A good shooter's hand does not tremble. He said, Your hand did not tremble, Rachel. He said, I am your father, and I have nothing to teach you about that. They finished lunch. He pushed her chair back to the Walter Reed gate. He kissed her on the top of her head at the gate. He did not, in the remaining 12 years of his life as of this recording, ask her about it again. He did not, by her account or by the account of her mother, repeat any part of what she told him to any other human being. He took it. He carried it. He is carrying it still. He is, at the time of this recording, 70 years old. He lives in Annapolis. He sails his sailboat. He reads. He teaches Sunday school. He is in good health. He is, by the actuarial tables, going to live another 15 to 20 years. He will, in those years, carry the story his daughter gave him in a small restaurant in Bethesda in January of 2012, and he will not speak of it. And when he dies, the story will go with him, except for the part of it that his daughter has chosen in 2022 and 2023 to give to me, and that I am giving, in the form you are hearing now, to you. She moved to Baltimore in the summer of 2013. She had been living between her medical retirement in November of 2012 and the move in her parents' house in Annapolis, in her old bedroom, while she figured out what to do next. She had taken, during that time, a series of long walks on the prosthetic around Annapolis, through the Naval Academy yard, along the seawall, through the historic district, past the church where her great-grandfather had served and where her father now taught Sunday school, and she had, on those walks, arrived at a decision. She wanted to teach. She had majored in history at the academy. She had loved history. She had loved, throughout her career as a Marine officer, the moments when she was teaching junior Marines, junior officers, anyone who would listen, about the lineage of the work they were doing, about the men and women who had done it before them, about the long story they were inside of. She wanted to teach that story to people who were not in the Corps. She wanted to teach it to 17-year-olds in a public school. She did not want to teach at the Naval Academy. She did not want to teach at a private school. She wanted to teach at a public high school in a city where the students were not the children of officers, where the students were the children of bus drivers and nurses and grocery cashiers and taxi drivers, and people who worked third shift at hospitals and warehouses, where the students would, in many cases, be the first members of their families to attend college, and where the unit on the Spanish-American War or the unit on Reconstruction or the unit on the First World War might be the only unit those students would ever take that asked them to think about the United States as a country with a history that was theirs. She enrolled at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore in a master's program in education in the summer of 2013 on the GI Bill, with the goal of obtaining a Maryland teaching certification. She completed the program in 18 months. She student taught at a charter school in West Baltimore. She received her certification in December of 2014. She was hired by Baltimore Polytechnic Institute on the recommendation of one of her Hopkins faculty members who knew the principal at Poly in January of 2015, mid-academic year, to take over a U.S. history class whose previous teacher had left for a personal emergency. She taught the second semester of that academic year. She was retained for the following year. She has been at Poly since. She has been, in the 9 years she has been at Poly, named the school's Teacher of the Year twice, in 2018 and in 2022. She has been promoted to head of the history department in 2021. She has, in the years of her tenure, taught approximately 1,100 students. She has written, by her estimate, approximately 800 letters of recommendation for college applications. She has attended, by her estimate, approximately 40 graduations of her students from college, when those students invited her, which a meaningful number of them have done. She has, in 2023, received a letter from a former student named Tarek Watson, who was in her 11th grade history class in 2017, who graduated from Poly in 2018, who graduated from the United States Naval Academy in 2022, who was at the time of the letter a second lieutenant of Marines undergoing the infantry officer course at Quantico, Virginia. The letter, which she showed me with his permission and his redactions, said in part, Captain Brennan, Ma'am, I am writing to tell you that I am at IOC. I am writing to tell you that I selected the Marine Corps because of your class. I am writing to tell you that I selected infantry because of you, although you have never told me a single thing about your time in the Corps that would have given me cause to think infantry. I am writing to tell you that my company commander at IOC, who is an instructor here, was a lieutenant in your company at Sangin in 2011. He was at PB Charlie. He was the platoon commander whose patrol got into the complex ambush on the 26th. He told me, when he found out I was your student, the whole story. He told me what you did. I am writing to tell you that I knew there was something you carried when I was in your class. I knew it from the way you taught the Spanish-American War. I did not know what it was. I know now. I am writing to tell you that I am going to try, every day I am in this Corps, to be worthy of having been your student. I do not know if I will succeed. I am going to try. Respectfully, Watson. The letter is on her refrigerator. It is held there by a magnet shaped like a crab, which a former student gave her for Christmas in 2017. The magnet is faded. The letter is fresh. The refrigerator is in the kitchen of the row house in Hampton. She has been, since 2014, in a relationship with a woman named Diane Coyle, who is a public defender in the Baltimore City Public Defender's Office, who is 43 years old, who grew up in Worcester, Massachusetts, who is the daughter of a retired postal worker and a retired elementary school nurse, who is, by every account I have heard from people who know them both, the partner Captain Brennan was waiting for whether or not she knew she was waiting. They live together in the row house in Hampton. They have a dog, a senior beagle named Margaret, who came to them through a rescue in 2018 and who is, at the time of this recording, approximately 14 years old and slowing down. They have a tomato garden in the back and a porch in the front and 2 bicycles in the basement that they ride on the weekends along the Jones Falls Trail. They are not married. They have not, in the 11 years they have been together, decided to marry. Captain Brennan told me, in 2023, that they have considered it and that they may yet do it and that there is no urgency about it. She said, Diane and I know what we are. We do not need a ceremony to ratify it. We may have the ceremony anyway, eventually. We are not in a hurry. She said, Marines are always in a hurry. I am not a Marine anymore. I am in no hurry about anything. I want to tell you about the gathering. The gathering is the thing I want to end on. The gathering happens every October. In October of 2014, 3 years after the IED, the first gathering occurred. It was organized by Master Sergeant Vurick, who was at that point still on active duty, and who had the addresses of every Marine who had been in Kilo Company in October of 2011 through the personnel records he was professionally entitled to use. Vurick contacted approximately 70 of the company's Marines who had been at one of the 3 patrol bases or at FOB Jackson on the 25th of October, 2011. He invited them to come to Baltimore on the weekend closest to the anniversary of the IED to spend a Saturday afternoon and evening at Captain Brennan's home, at her invitation, with no agenda, no formal program, and no expectation. 11 Marines came that first year, including Vurick, including Peretta, including Lieutenant Halstead, including Lieutenant Whitlock, including Staff Sergeant Ramirez, and including 6 lance corporals and sergeants whose names I have not been authorized to use. They came. They sat on her porch. They drank beer from bottles. She drank tea. She has not, since 2013, consumed alcohol, not for any reason of medical necessity, not for any reason of recovery, but because she made a quiet decision during her first year teaching that her morning clarity for the classroom was worth more to her than the evening relaxation of a glass of wine, and she stopped, and she has not started again. She drank tea. They drank beer. They did not talk, that first afternoon, about the courtyard. They talked about their families, their jobs, their lives. They talked about the Marines who had not come, including the ones who could not come because they were still on active duty deployed somewhere, and the ones who could not come because they had chosen not to, for reasons that were their own, and the ones who could not come because they were dead, of whom there were two, both by suicide, both in the period between 2012 and 2014. The dead were toasted. Then the conversation moved on. The gathering ended at approximately 10 in the evening. The Marines went to their hotels or to the homes of friends in the area, or, in two cases, to the floor of her living room with sleeping bags. They left in the morning. They went home. The next October, they came back. The October after that, they came back. Every October since 2014, they have come back. The number of Marines who attend has varied between 11 and 14. Some Marines have come every year. Some have come once. Some have come twice and then stopped, for reasons of their own that no one in the gathering has ever asked them to explain. Vurick has come every year. Peretta has come every year, even from Houston, even during the years of his medical residency, when the trip cost him a sleep cycle he could not really afford. Halstead has come every year. Whitlock has come every year. Ramirez has come every year. The four of them, plus Vurick, plus a rotating cast of others, have, over the 11 years from 2014 to 2024, sat on her porch in Hampton every October, in the cool of the autumn evening, and have done the thing the gathering does, which is the thing I want to describe to you now, because it is the thing the whole story has been moving toward, and the thing that, in my view, is the answer to the question I asked at the beginning of this video, which I told you I would not answer the first time, and which I am about to answer for the second time. The thing the gathering does is this. The gathering does not, in any year, formally discuss the courtyard. The gathering does not, in any year, conduct a memorial service. The gathering does not, in any year, recite the names of the wounded or the killed. The gathering does not have a moment of silence. The gathering does not have speeches. The gathering does not have an agenda. The Marines who come do not, in any organized way, acknowledge why they have come. They come. They sit. They drink. They talk about their lives. They look at their commanding officer, who is sitting on her porch in a wooden chair with her prosthetic leg crossed over her real leg in the way she has learned over 12 years to cross them comfortably, with a cup of tea in her hand, in a flannel shirt, with her dog at her feet, with her partner Diane in the kitchen washing dishes, or in the doorway listening, or sometimes sitting in the chair next to her not saying anything. They look at her. She looks at them. They sit together for several hours. At some point in the evening, by an unspoken protocol that has developed over the years and that no one has ever articulated to anyone else, each Marine, at some point during the evening, approaches her chair, or her in the kitchen, or her on the steps of the porch, and says one sentence to her, in private, that no one else hears. The sentence varies by Marine and by year. The sentence is, in some cases, a piece of news from the Marine's life that the Marine has not told anyone else, that the Marine has carried for a year, and that the Marine has come to Baltimore in October to deliver to her in private and then to leave with her. The sentence is, in other cases, a question. The sentence is, in other cases, the same sentence that Marine has said to her every October for 10 years, with no variation, like a small private liturgy that the two of them have between them, and that the Marine needs to perform once a year in order to remain who he is. The sentence is, in one case, the sentence that Master Sergeant Vurick has said to her every October for 11 years, which is a sentence I am not going to share with you because it is between Vurik and his captain, and the only reason I know it is that Vurik told it to me with the express understanding that I would not put it in this video, and I am not going to. He said, I am telling you so that you know there is a sentence. I am not telling you so that you know what the sentence is. There is a sentence. That is what you need to know. That is enough for the audience to know. The audience does not need the sentence. The audience needs to know there is one. She receives the sentences. She does not respond to them in the same form. She does not, by any account, give a sentence back. What she does, when each Marine has said his sentence, is she puts her hand on the Marine's hand, or on his arm, or on his shoulder, depending on the Marine and the moment, and she holds it there for a measure of time that is longer than a polite touch and shorter than an embrace. And she says, I'm glad you came. She says it every time. She says it to every Marine. She has said it, by my count, several hundred times over the 11 years. She means it every time. The Marines know she means it every time. The Marines come back the following October. That is the whole transaction. That is the whole gathering. That is what those 11 men and women have been doing on a porch in Hampton every October for 11 years. On the anniversary of the morning their commanding officer stepped on the third paver from the platoon command post door and decided, in the seconds between the blast and the tourniquet, to stay. I want to tell you about her prosthetic leg and her boot and the door, and then I am going to ask the question for the second time, and I am going to answer it, and then I am going to be done. The prosthetic leg she wears at the gatherings is the same prosthetic leg she wears every day. It is a transtibial prosthesis with a microprocessor-controlled foot, manufactured by a company in Iceland whose products the Department of Veterans Affairs procures for amputee veterans through a long-standing contract. The prosthesis is on its fourth generation since her first definitive prosthesis was issued at Walter Reed in February of 2012. The current generation was fitted in 2023. It will, by the manufacturer's estimate, last her another 5 to 7 years before it needs to be replaced. She maintains it. She charges it overnight. She knows it as well as she knows her own body, because in the relevant sense it is her body, and it has been her body for longer now than she had her left leg below the knee. Given that she is 41 and her left leg below the knee was lost when she was 28, which means that as of October 2024, she has been a transtibial amputee for 13 years and was not one for 28, and that the ratio is, by the year-over-year compounding of every additional October, becoming more equal in a direction that does not particularly concern her one way or the other. The boot is a different matter. The boot is one boot. It is the right boot from the pair of Marine Corps combat boots she was wearing on the 25th of October, 2011. The left boot was destroyed in the blast. The right boot was preserved by Master Sergeant Vurik, who removed it from her right foot in the TOC at PB Toulon during the 72 hours, who placed it in a plastic bag, who carried it with her gear when she was evacuated, who returned it to her when he visited her at Walter Reed in December. He gave it to her in the dayroom of the Fisher House. He did not say anything when he gave it to her. She did not say anything when she received it. She has had it ever since. The boot stands by the front door of the row house in Hampton. The boot is on a small mat, along with her current pair of walking shoes and Diane's running shoes, and a pair of garden clogs they share, and the dog's leash. The boot is not on display. The boot is not labeled. The boot is not in a case. The boot is on the mat with the other shoes. People who visit the house do not, generally, notice that one of the shoes on the mat is a single Marine Corps combat boot, dust-stained, worn, with the laces loosely tied, with no companion. People who notice it do not generally ask about it. The 2 or 3 people who have asked about it over the years have received, depending on the person, a variety of answers, none of which have been the full answer, all of which have been honest. To Diane, in 2015, when Diane first noticed it during her first overnight visit and asked what it was, Captain Brennan said, "It's a boot I kept." To her father, when he came up from Annapolis in 2016 for a weekend visit and saw it on the mat. It's a boot I kept. To her mother, when her mother came up the same weekend. It's a boot I kept. To a former student, in 2021, who came over for help with a college application essay, and who noticed it as he was leaving and asked, "It's a boot I kept." To me, in 2022, on her front porch, when I asked, "It's a boot I kept." She has, by my best understanding, never explained the boot to anyone who has asked beyond that sentence. The sentence is sufficient. The boot is by the door. She steps past it on the prosthetic leg every time she leaves the house, and every time she comes home, several times a day, every day, for 9 years now in this house, and previously for 5 years in the apartment in Annapolis where she lived with her parents and then alone. The boot is the first thing she sees when she comes home. The boot is the last thing she sees when she leaves. The boot is not a memorial. The boot is not a trophy. The boot is not a wound she keeps fresh. The boot is, by her account, simply a boot that she had once, that she still has, that she has not seen any reason to throw away, and that she is going to keep on the mat by the door for as long as she has a door. The math, as I told you in the description of this video, is 1 leg, 1 boot, 42 Marines. I want to refine the math. The math is 1 leg, 1 boot, 42 Marines who walked out of PB Talon and PB Charlie and PB Bravo and FOB Jackson alive in the period of the contact cycle of October 25th through 28th, 2011, that she ran from a litter with a radio handset, with a tourniquet, with a morphine drip, with the help of 1 gunnery sergeant and 1 corpsman and 1 platoon commander and 1 executive officer and 1 staff sergeant on a canal path and several dozen other Marines whose names will not appear in this video, but whose work appeared in the absence of casualties on those days. The math is also Hospitalman Peretta, who is now a doctor, who learned in those 72 hours how to manage a patient who is a person who is a set of obligations, who uses what she taught him every shift in Houston. The math is also Master Sergeant Vurick, who is now a counselor for adolescent boys in Michigan, who learned in those 72 hours what the word command means, who has organized the gathering every October for 11 years. The math is also First Lieutenant Whitlock, who is now a lieutenant colonel at the Pentagon, who learned in those 72 hours what it costs to be ready to take command before the institution would have given it to you, and who has, in the 12 years since, by his own account to me, never been less ready to take command than he was at 0515 on the 25th of October, 2011, and who has structured every assignment he has accepted since around the principle that he will not be caught not ready again. The math is also First Lieutenant Halstead, who is now a high school principal in Cincinnati, Ohio, who runs a school of 1,400 students by methods he learned, in part, from watching his commanding officer run a rifle company from a litter for 3 days. The math is also Staff Sergeant Ramirez, who is now a fire captain in El Paso, Texas, who has, in the 12 years since the Canal Path, lost 1 firefighter in his career, and who has, in his own words to me, taken the loss the way he took her, which is to say with the procedure intact and the grief sealed in a place he can manage and the work continuing. The math is also Tarek Watson, who is now a Marine lieutenant in his 1st Infantry Billet, who selected the Corps because of a teacher in Baltimore, who knew there was something she carried, who knows now what it was, who is going to try every day to be worthy. The math is also approximately 1,100 high school students at Baltimore Polytechnic Institute, who have taken 11th grade U.S. history from a captain who never told them about Sangin and who taught them, instead, that the United States of America is a country with a long story in it, and that they are inside the story, and that the story is theirs, and that the story will become whatever they make of it. The math is the leg. The math is the boot. The math is 42 Marines on the morning of the 28th of October, 2011. The math is everything that has happened since. That is the math. Now I am going to ask the question for the second time. The question is, what does the United States Marine Corps owe a captain who, on the morning of the 25th of October, 2011, refused the medevac, stayed in command for 72 hours, ran a contact cycle from a litter, handed off her company in good order, lost her leg, completed her rehabilitation, requested a continuing assignment, was promised one in good faith by an officer who then retired into a $450,000 a year position at a defense contractor and forgot to follow through on the promise, was forgotten by the institution through the ordinary friction of a change of command, and was medically retired at 29 years old with a handshake and a pension and a parking spot at the Veterans Affairs Hospital. What does the Corps owe her? The answer is, it depends on who you ask. If you ask the institution, the answer is nothing. The institution paid her. The institution gave her her benefits. The institution honored its contractual obligations to her. The institution did not commit a tort against her. The institution did not do anything wrong, in the sense the institution understands wrong. The institution is, to this day, in no debt to Captain Rachel Elizabeth Brennan. The institution does not believe it owes her anything. The institution will, when she dies, send a folded flag to her next of kin. The institution will, until she dies, deposit her retirement pay into her bank account on the first of every month. That is what the institution thinks it owes her. That is what the institution will pay. If you ask Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hayes, retired, Vice President for Strategic Programs, Northrop Grumman Corporation, what he owes her, I cannot tell you what the answer would be, because I have not asked him, because I made a decision early in the preparation of this video that I would not contact him, because the decision of whether to contact him is a decision that belongs to her, and she has indicated to me that the decision, if she ever makes it, will be made privately. I do not know what Hayes would say. I know what he sent. He sent one paragraph on the 14th of February, 2012, with the line working on it, will follow up Q2, and then he retired 45 days before Q2 began. That is what he sent. I am going to leave it where it is. If you ask Master Sergeant Cole Verrick, retired, what the Marine Corps owes Captain Brennan, Verrick will tell you, and did tell me, in his kitchen in Ypsilanti, the Corps owes her nothing it can pay. He said, the Corps cannot pay what it owes her. He said, the Corps does not have what it owes her in its currency. He said, what it owes her, only her Marines can pay, and we are paying it, on her porch, every October. He said, that is not a complaint about the Corps. The Corps cannot pay it. It is not the Corps' fault that it cannot pay it. The Corps deals in pay grades and citations and parking spots. What is owed to her is not in those denominations. We pay it in the denomination it is owed in. We will pay it until we die. That is what we owe her, and that is what we are paying. If you ask me, Hatch Holloway, what I think the Corps owes her, I will tell you. I will tell you, because I told you at the beginning of this video that I would answer the question the second time. I am answering the question. I think the Corps owes her the truth. I think the Corps owes her, specifically, the institutional honesty to acknowledge that on the 14th of February, 2012, an email was sent by an outgoing battalion commander to the Manpower and Reserve Affairs section regarding a wounded captain whose continuing service the Corps had a use for, and that the email was acknowledged, and that the email was not followed up on, and that the failure to follow up was the result of the ordinary friction of a change of command and not the result of any malice or any decision against her, and that the ordinary friction of a change of command, in the case of a wounded captain who had refused the medevac and run a contact cycle from a litter for 72 hours, was not, in retrospect, sufficient. I think the Corps owes her an acknowledgement that the system failed her, in a small administrative way that no individual was responsible for, and that the failure of the system in her case is a failure that the system should be embarrassed about, and that the system should, on its own institutional initiative and without her having to ask, have made some gesture in the direction of correcting in the years since. I do not think the gesture would have to be large. I do not think the gesture would have to be financial. I think the gesture would have to be a phone call from a lieutenant general to her at her home in Hampton on a Saturday afternoon with no agenda except to say, "Captain, the Corps lost track of you. We should not have. We are not asking you to come back. We know it is too late for that. We are calling to tell you that we know what happened and that we are sorry and that we are not going to let it happen to the next one. That is what we owe you. We are paying it now. Goodbye." That phone call has not been made. I do not expect it to be made. I am not, in this video, calling for it to be made. I am stating, for the record, that it has not been made, and that it should be, and that the absence of it is the wound that the Corps has not paid, and that the Corps is unlikely to pay, because institutions do not, generally, make those phone calls. What the Corps did not pay, her Marines have paid. They have paid it in the denomination of October, on a porch in Hampton, with one sentence at a time, in private, with her hand on theirs for a measure of time longer than a polite touch and shorter than an embrace, with the words, "I'm glad you came," which she has said to them several hundred times, over 11 years, and which she means every time, and which they know she means every time. They have paid it. They are paying it. They will pay it until one of them is dead, and then the rest of them will pay it, until two of them are dead, and then the rest of them will pay it, until there is only one of them left, and then that one will pay it, alone, for one final October, on her porch, if she is still in the house, or at her grave, if she is not. They will pay it until there is no one left to pay it. That is what they owe her. That is what they have decided to pay. The Corps cannot match it. The Corps does not have to match it. The Corps had its chance. The chance was a phone call from a lieutenant general. The chance is still available. The Corps is unlikely to take it. Her Marines have taken the chance the Corps did not. They are taking it again next October. She will be on the porch. Diane will be in the kitchen. Margaret the Beagle will be at her feet. The boot will be by the door. The leg will be crossed over the leg. The tea will be in her hand. The Marines will come up the walk, one by one, in the cool of the evening, in their flannel shirts and their work jackets and their hats from the union locals and the fire departments and the high schools where they coach. They will sit on the porch. They will drink. They will talk about their lives. At some point in the evening, each of them will approach her, in private, and say his sentence. She will put her hand on his hand. She will say, "I'm glad you came." He will go back to his beer. The next Marine will come up. The same thing will happen. It will happen until everyone has come up. It will happen the way it has happened every October since 2014. It will happen again in 2025. It will happen again in 2026. It will happen for as long as it can happen. It is the thing that is owed. It is the thing that is paid. It is the only thing that has ever been the thing. I told you, at the beginning, that I was going to ask a question and that I was going to answer it the second time, but not the first. I have asked it twice. I have answered it. The Corps owes her a phone call it will not make. Her Marines owe her in October, and they are paying it. That is the math. That is the whole math. There is no other math. Captain Rachel Elizabeth Brennan, United States Marine Corps, 0302. Annapolis, Maryland by birth. Hampton, Baltimore by choice. 11th grade U.S. History. 41 years old. 42 Marines. 1 leg. 1 boot. 1 porch. 11 Octobers. The 12th is coming. We owe her. The Corps forgot. I didn't. I'll be back next week with another one. Bring someone.